So, good evening. Well, it's an honor and privilege to stand before you tonight, and the topic, as Dave said, is a very important one. And from our perspective, as I've been watching the developments in the Islamic world, I think it's going to become, especially for Christians, increasingly an interesting end-time awareness sort of topic. There are about 1.3 billion Muslims in the world today, and current estimates are that maybe only like 7% of them ascribe to a sort of radical Islamic theology. But that's about 91 million people, and that's more than enough to serve as recruiting grounds for the various jihadi groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Boko Haram. And so it really was an interest for me. What are the specific aspects of Islamic theology in this belief system that are causing these people to become radicals and are causing them then to go out and do acts of violence and murder and things that we look at and say, how can they possibly be doing this? But they're doing it out of a strong conviction that they are obeying their God and that He's pleased with what they're doing. So I thought it'd be good just to break this down, to look at the various pieces. So we have to define a few terms tonight as we start so that we all know exactly what we're talking about. So on the flags that you see above you, there's the one on the right-hand side is Saudi Arabia. And they actually represent, as a nation, they represent the one side of Islam, the Sunnis. And on their flag, this is called the Shahada. And what's written there in Arabic is, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. On the other side is the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And they represent the Shiites as a nation. And they have a difference, although they have the same Quran. We'll go into why the differences have evolved in their theology and in their belief system. And actually what's written in their flag is 22 times between the green and the white, and the red and the white is the saying Allah Akbar. And if you're ever in a bus and you hear someone screaming Allah Akbar, you better dive for cover, because it's mostly what these jihadis do. They shout this out before they do some act of violence. Okay, so I hope you never hear that in the bus. Right, especially if you're in Israel, I suppose. The question is, just after the 9/11, George Bush got up and he said, the day afterwards, he said he visited some Islamic institution in America, and he said, Islam is peace. And the motivation for saying this, of course, is because there are many Muslims that are not radical, and of course it was his effort to try and bring them in and say, you're not our enemies, we want to be with you. But the actual meaning of Islam means submission. The word salam in Arabic means peace. So actually Islam means submission, and a Muslim is one who submits. And of course, the jihadis, and I'm going very much now into the 7%, the jihadi mindset. How do they think, and why do they think like this? And from their perspective, when they hear someone saying Islam is peace, this disturbs them, because they don't want to be seen as a weak religion. They want it to be seen as a strong religion, because then they can get more recruits. And so there's one Islamist, a very famous author in Egypt, and he said, yes, it is a religion of peace, but only in the sense that we're going to save all mankind from worshipping false gods. And once everyone is submitted to Allah, then they will have this inner peace of knowing that they're serving the true God. So Islam is only peace in this sense from the jihadi mindset. So just to say again, what I'm saying a lot tonight is exploring this jihadi mindset, which doesn't represent all Muslims, but it represents the 7%. So the true Muslim believes that the Quran is the word of God revealed to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. And Muhammad never performed any miracles like Jesus Christ did. And so the Islamists say this is his standing miracle, that he received this revelation directly from Allah through the angel. And this is a great miracle. And every word is exactly true. And it's actually the sound of God's voice when you read it in Arabic. Okay, and it's special because it's very much, it came out of the Arabic world. And so there's very much an Arab nationalistic sense that the Arab language, Arabic language, is something very special. God spoke this language and God speaks Arabic, and you have to read the Quran in Arabic to really understand it. There are two other terms that are important. One is the hadith, and the other one is the sirah, because you can't really understand the Islamic mindset. It's not the same as like we have the Bible, and you could read the Bible and understand lots about Christianity and Judaism just from the Bible. But the Quran is only a small part of their religious text. The hadith is basically the sayings of Muhammad that his followers that were with him at the time when he was on the earth wrote down many years later. And they said, the Prophet said this and the Prophet said that. And these sayings of what the Prophet said in certain circumstances were compiled into certain books called the hadith. And so and this is also where you get a bit of the difference between the Shiites and the Sunnis, because they have different hadith books, different sayings of the prophets in that sense. And Muhammad's life story. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I see, I forgot all about that. Muhammad's life story. Hang on now. Muhammad's autobiography is called the Sirah, and that's the story of his life. And this is important because if we look at this slide, this defines Islamic understanding. Okay, you can see that from the perspective there on that slide, the graph, that the Quran is only 14% of the religious text. The hadith, the sayings of what the followers of Muhammad said during this time, accounts for 60%. And the Sirah, the story of Muhammad's life, his autobiography, counts for 26%. And so the Quran says 91 times that Muhammad's life, that the pattern of his life is the divine pattern for all humanity that we should follow. And so this is very much then also the understanding. If you just read the Quran, you can't really gain so much understanding. You have to take all three of these works as a whole and view Muhammad's life from these three perspectives to really understand how a good Muslim should live and what sort of actions he should be doing and what sort of things he should be saying. And these, the hadith and the sirah together are called the sunnah. Okay. Now, the sunnah is relevant because we have something called Sharia law. Okay, this is Islamic law. And Islamic law must be based on sayings in the Quran and sayings in the hadith, in the sunnah. It has to be based basically on the life of Muhammad, the teachings of Muhammad, on the revelation that he has received. And if it's not in that, then you don't actually, it's not a valid Sharia law. And this Islamic law is what regulates most aspects of public life. That's how it's aspects of society in an Islamic country are governed by Sharia law. And you'll very often hear, and even in Canada, in Ontario, for a few years, they actually had introduced a Sharia court, an Islamic law court for a few years. And there were actually some secular Muslims that got together because they really understood what this meant. And they actually went against that, and they gave the government very good reasons and explained it to them. And it ended up that a judgment came that Canada decided that there would be no separate faith-based courts in Canada. So these guys are still out there. These organizations that wanted to introduce Sharia law into Canada are still there, and they will still try again, most probably in other states. So it's very important to understand what Sharia law is, and we'll go into some of that tonight. just in terms of a quick timeline, Muhammad received his first revelation in 610, and the last revelation in 632, where he said, "Today I've completed your religion for you." And then there was a phase where his followers took over from him once he had died. And this was the phase basically of the oral traditions of the hadith, of what they would say, and the followers would say, and Muhammad said this in this situation, and all these things. And while this oral tradition was going on about the hadith, they had actually had Islamic teachers arising, and they started writing down different laws for people to help them to live lives that were pleasing to Allah. Because I suppose they had to try and make it concrete to people. People wanted to know, must I do this or must I do that? And so all these laws came. And then after a while, just towards the end of the 700s, they started writing down the oral traditions about the hadith, about what the Prophet Muhammad had said in certain situations, and where he gave his approval to what, or tacit approval to something, or disapproval for something. So an example from the Shahira law, there's different topics that they address. And one topic that they address is jihad. And the Quran in chapter 2, verse 216 defines jihad as fighting in Allah's cause is ordained for you Muslims. Okay? Though you dislike it, but maybe that something you dislike is a good thing for you, and Allah knows. And then, of course, the Shahira, like I said, has to be based on the Quran, and also has to be based on the Hadith as well. And one of the famous, there are two famous ones, the Muslim and the Bukhari, the two famous and authoritative Hadiths. And Muhammad said, "I have been ordered to wage war against mankind until they accept that there is no God but Allah, and that they believe I am his prophet." And Bukhari said, Muhammad said, "To battle kafirs are unbelievers." Okay? Derogatory name for unbelievers. Anyone who does not accept that there's only one God, who's Allah, and that Muhammad is his prophet, is termed an unbeliever. And to battle kafirs in jihad for even one day is greater than the entire earth and everything in it. And this is also a bit of a play. Paradise is brought in here because it's very much a works-based religion. And the comparison, dying in jihad is something that is pleasing to God, and it will ensure you a spot in paradise, basically, is the insinuation that is brought through by the jihadis trying to recruit their people. Now, if we look at the effectiveness of jihad, we can see that in the first 13 years of Muhammad's life, he was he had received this revelation, and he saw himself as a prophet, and he went around and he tried to establish credibility with the Christians and with the Jews, saying, I'm a prophet as well, I received this thing, and accept me as a prophet. And of course, he didn't receive so much credibility. There were also, at that time, in Mecca, there were many other gods and many other prophets running around. And so he actually established in the first 13 years of his life very few followers. Then came a very decisive moment. Him and the followers that he had gathered were actually quite persecuted at that time. And then there was a small battle. And in this battle, him and his very few followers came up against quite greater odds. And he won a very decisive victory at that point. And this was actually then the first battle for jihad. And from then, he established his authority, basically, as a prophet in winning this battle and saying, look, Allah's with me. We beat these guys with these great odds, and it's a sign from God. And basically, from that point onwards, he started spreading his religion. And because people had rejected him as a prophet, I think this is also why the very strong focus is is that there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. He brought in the second part, Muhammad is his prophet. He wanted people to accept that he was the prophet. And very often it was at the point of the sword to get people to accept this. And you can see in the different texts that are displayed there that in the Sirah, which is the story of his life, that jihad is over more than 60% of his life story is actually devoted to jihad. And so this is a very strong example from Muhammad's life of the importance of jihad. That's why someone like bin Laden, who was very fully immersed in this radicalized Islamic mindset, would say we should fully understand our religion. Fighting is a part of our religion and our shahira. Those who love God, Allah, and His Prophet, and this religion cannot deny that. Whoever denies even a minor tenet of our religion commits the gravest sin in Islam. So this is the mindset of these radicals. They're saying basically, we have embraced the fullness of Islam. And if you don't embrace this fullness of Islam, then you are basically committing a very bad sin. The second part of what he says, we'll move into that now, is very much a dissatisfaction amongst these jihadis that the rulers in the Islamic world are not fully embracing this kind of theology. And so there are many dictators, people that are making themselves incredibly rich with the oil money, and many people who are just common people are suffering because of this. And so this is also a very big bone of contention, and they're saying this needs to change. We need some form of justice. We need rulers that will arise that are living according to the Sharia law, that will establish justice in our part of the world. And the solution, which was once Muhammad died, one of his followers took over, and he was called the Caliph. And under this Caliph, he was able to unite all the Muslims and establish the first Arabic national state using this religion of Islam. And this empire that he started then is called the Caliphate. So the terms Caliph and Caliphate are also very important to understanding what is actually going on in the Islamic world today. And what's the appeal of the Caliphate? So after Muhammad's death, in 70 years later, that Islam had spread from Spain to Morocco, in the northern Africa, parts of Europe in Spain, all the way to Central Asia. And it was a huge area under the control of one single Muslim leader. And this carried on there were some dynasties after that of Islamic leaders, and there's a golden period, what's called the Islamic Golden Age, from mid-8th century to the mid-13th century. And under the Islamic empire of this time, there were many discoveries and innovations in the areas of art and technology and different things, and medicine. And so this is looked back by the Islamists today and say we need to return to this sort of understanding of Islam so that we can bring back this golden age of prosperity, where the Arabic nation in that sense were really the rulers of this empire, having come out of Mecca and Medina and appointed their own people that were ruling at that time. And so it's a sign of great Islamic unity. And this caliphate that was established after Muhammad's death actually existed for 1,300 years. And I've actually found it interesting in a lot of this is a side note in the Christian end times theology, that this empire that existed for 1,300 years is very often ignored. And it passed on to the Ottomans somewhere around the 16th century. And then a leader came in Turkey. The Ottomans were Turks, and took over, and he actually wanted to introduce more secular reforms. And he actually ended up putting an end to the Islamic Caliphate in 1924. And suddenly, the Islamic world, after 1,300 years, this had been like it had always been there, the Caliph, the Caliphate. It was something like, I could imagine, like Roman Christians suddenly saying, we don't have a pope anymore. There's no more Rome. There's no more Vatican. And suddenly they had to start asking themselves, what has happened to us? Where's our identity? What's going on? And suddenly they awoke and they saw that the Western world had arisen in technology, and all these things that they had associated with the Islamic Golden Age were no longer there. And had all, with the Renaissance and everything, had moved to Western Europe. And so this caused them to start asking lots of questions. And then, of course, after the Second World War, Israel was established once again in this area, the rebirth of the nation Israel. And we'll come to some of this, but this was like, for them, they couldn't believe that this was really going on. And then there was the Six-Day War, which they lost in 1967, where all the Muslim nations gathered around, and they lost this war. And of course, then the religious leaders said, well, like Nasser in Egypt, they had tried to replace the Islamic Caliphate, which was under Sharia law, with a more secular democracy. It happened in Turkey, it happened in Egypt. And this is obviously why you lost the war. It's Allah speaking to you, saying, you've left his way, and now this is his punishment. The Jews are defeating you so easily, even though they had such a huge, massive army that came up against Israel, they lost. And then there was a second war in 1973, and they lost that war as well. And so they really, of course, then the religious leaders in Islam really started getting busy and saying, we have to restore the caliphate, we have to appoint a caliph, and we have to get back to the pure understanding of Islam, and then God will start to bless us. So, as they started with this sort of idea of restoring the caliphate, there were, of course, these dictators that were controlling the oil money, and that had made alliances with the Western countries. And so any attempt to disrupt the status quo was met with force, and so they started saying, okay, we are trying to follow Allah. We are trying to establish our Islamic caliphate again, so we can live according to Islamic law. And they start to see, like in Afghanistan, people coming in Iraq, the crusaders, invaders coming in, from their mindset, and they start saying, well, these guys are just being brutal with us, and they're stopping us from really doing the will of God in our country. And so it's also like the Prophet Muhammad had also said that when someone turns away from God, that people would eventually lose track of who they are. And a big thing that would begin to happen was just like they would engage in sexual intercourse in public like donkeys. That's what he said. And so they look at the Western world as well with the very progressive, liberal sexual morality that's going on there, and they can see evidence of what Muhammad's saying is true. So they're saying, we don't want to go down that path. We can see it's not right for us, and so we want this caliphate, and they begin to fight harder and harder for it. And so it's not surprising then that a group arises sort of in the whole situation in Iraq and in Syria, calling itself ISIL initially. And ISIL, they came wearing black uniforms and with black flags, and what they were doing really was to saying, we want to return back to the 8th century, because the dynasty that was ruling in the 8th century, in this Islamic golden age, they wore black uniforms, and they came to power with black flags. And so they were playing very much on this, also with the regional name. That's why we first had the ISIL, and then we had ISIS, where the Levant was Iraq and Levant, and which was the regional name for that territory, and then it became Iraq and Syria, and they established their caliphates there, and they have appointed their caliph there. And the black flags that they use are the ones, like I said, from the 8th century. And on the writing, the white writing on top of the flag says, "There is no God but Allah." And in the circle below that, it says, "Muhammad is the messenger of God," which is supposed to be the seal of Muhammad. And there's also a hadith. And these hadiths don't just contain what Muhammad has done, they also contain prophetic utterances of the future. And one of the prophetic utterances is when you see the black banners coming from the direction of Kurdistan, you will go and join them, even if it means you have to crawl over ice. For it is that army that will liberate the Holy Land, Jerusalem, and no force will be able to stop that army because he's the Caliph of Allah, the Mahdi. Okay? So there are many prophetic utterances about the coming of a great Islamic leader, and this leader is called the Mahdi in their prophetic utterances. And they are waiting for him to come and unite basically the whole Islamic world under his rulership, to usher in a peace, an era of peace and prosperity for them once again, and to restore justice, basically. So we're going to have a bit of a look at that, because there's a few differences between the Sunnis and the Shiites when they think about this, the coming of the great Islamic leader, the Mahdi that's coming. And the Sunnis believe that the Mahdi will be very just, and his capital will be in Jerusalem. And he will lead them into great victory against the tyrants on the Arabian Peninsula. And once he's done that, once he's established the caliphate, and he's got rid of all the dictators in the Arabian Peninsula, then there'll be a great war called the War of Armageddon. Okay? And Jerusalem will be restored during this time. And it also goes on to say that once the Mahdi is in Jerusalem, that's actually an Antichrist figure will arise. And this Antichrist figure is called the Dajjal. But luckily for the Mahdi, Jesus will come back at this time, and he will fight against the Antichrist and defeat the Antichrist. So this is all a bit, well, it's quite interesting. But it's also a little bit strange. But basically what Jesus does when he comes back, he submits to the Mahdi. Okay? And Jesus in Islam is not the son of God. God has no son in Islam. And Islam believes that Jesus did not die upon the cross. He also got taken into heaven. That's why he's coming back at this point in time. And actually the Mahdi will say to him, "Oh, Jesus, you're here now. Do you want to lead prayers?" And Jesus will submit to the Mahdi and say, "No, Mahdi, you're the chosen one that needs to lead the prayers." So the Jesus of Islam is very different to the Christian Jesus. Okay? And one further thing that Jesus will do, that he'll go to the Christians and he'll say, "Hey, you guys, you've got a book that's corrupted, you know. Muhammad came and he told you the real way, and you haven't obeyed him. Now get your act together and submit to the Mahdi and follow the teachings of Muhammad." This is what the Jesus of Islam will do and say. In the Shiite religion, there's also a Mahdi. He's called the 12th Imam that will come. Actually, he's already been born, but he disappeared. Apparently, his mother hid him because the enemies were trying to kill him way back in the 13th century. And but he will come back in the events known as the occultation because occult means to hide something. Occultation is when he comes back and reappears. And he will supernaturally reappear just before the day of judgment. So, and also in the Shiite prophecies, there will also be flags involved, and from Yemen, a ruler a great fighter, Islamic leader will arise, and he will gather together people with white flags. And also from Iraq, coming out of Iraq, there will also be a group carrying black flags, and they will come together at Mecca, and there the Mahdi will meet them. Okay, so in the Shiite thing, more his center will be Mecca, where he gathers his armies together. And then Jesus will also come to this Mahdi, the Shiites believe, and he'll also submit to this Mahdi. And Jesus will actually then do jihad and sort out the Christians and all the unbelievers that haven't submitted to Muhammad at that point in time. But when I saw this about Yemen, then today we can see there's actually a huge conflict brewing in the Arabic world concerning Yemen, where Saudi Arabia, with the Sunnis and Iran, who are supporting the Shiites in Yemen, where they're coming into conflict. And I think that a lot of it has to do with this kind of prophecy that says that the great Shiite leader will arise out of Yemen, and they're preparing the way, they're expecting the Mahdi to come back, and so they're getting ready for this. So they're not willing to the Shiites are not willing to pull out of Yemen and to leave that to the Sunnis. Okay. And this is a very important aspect also of their belief system that gets repeated over and over again. If you go on the internet, you'll find that a lot of these jihadi groups, they love this. It's actually written into the Hamas covenant, the founding statement of Hamas, that the judgment day will only come when the Muslims fight the Jews and kill them. And this is a promise that it says also related by Bukhari and Muslim in the Hadith, that this will happen. And so they're saying, no matter how long it takes, we are committed to this goal of killing all the Jews, because then we will usher in this sense, the day of judgment and the return of the Mahdi. And of course, the slogan also of the Muslim Brotherhood, Jesus is the path, jihad is the path, and death for the sake of Allah is the loftiest of its wishes. When you have a look at this, you can know that we are if you look at what happened in the 6-Day War, where the secular Arab nations surrounded Jerusalem and went in to go and fight it, to destroy it, or to destroy the Jews and eradicate the nation of Israel, you can know that the jihadi Islamic mindset is we need to gather the warriors together that are motivated, that are trained, that know how to fight, that are willing to give their lives for the cause of Allah, that will not run away and will not give up until we have accomplished this goal. And this is what they're working towards. The Sunnis, obviously, with their prophecies, because they see the Mahdi coming into Jerusalem and ruling and reigning from Jerusalem, that they don't want to destroy Israel with a nuclear bomb, because then it will not be possible anymore because of the radiation or whatever. So they're more the ones for gathering the armies and overrunning Israel. The Shiites on the other side, Jerusalem does not play any real major role for them, and so they're quite happy that's why they're going the path of getting the nuclear bomb, and they would be and that's why they have stated one of the objectives also with nuclear weapons is to eradicate Israel from the map completely. So that's also a difference how their theology affects basically the approach that they're taking towards Israel in this matter. So just a quick summary. So the Islamic ideal is the establishment of the Caliphate, the Islamic empire, and a ruler called the Caliph. and most Muslims await a messianic figure, the Mahdi, to arise and restore justice and prosperity. The 8th century is taken as an example of how Allah will bless with victory those who live according to Islamic Sharia law in an Islamic state. The Islamists see opponents of Islamic State as motivated by humanistic ideals, the corruption of wealth and the spread of immorality, which are placed above the laws of God. The teachings and life of Muhammad give an example for the way an armed jihad is to be pursued, and end-time prophetic statements are about a continual armed war against the Kafir unbelievers with an eventual Islamic victory. I would say this is not only, they do not stop once Israel is destroyed. I mean, there's enough rhetoric out there to know that jihad carries on until the whole world is part. It's a one world government under the Mahdi, under this Caliph, which is their eventual goal, just to make that clear. So there was a study done in a couple of Muslim nations, and they asked the Muslims, do you believe that the Mahdi will return in your lifetime? So there were, in a lot of countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, Tunisia, more than 60% of the adult Muslims believe that the return of the Mahdi is imminent. Okay? And also, it's also close, a little bit less, their conviction also that when the Mahdi comes, that Jesus will also appear with him and sort the Christians out at that point in time. Of course, the two countries that weren't included in the survey because it was very difficult to ask some of these questions in Islamic countries were Saudi Arabia and Iran, probably just because they are so radical in their belief system and it's much more difficult to do this kind of survey there. An interesting point coming from Western Europe. Basically, they also did a comparison between the belief systems of immigrant Muslims coming into Western Europe and the native Christians that are living there. So one that's important, I think, is where they say that the religious laws are more important than secular laws, that about 65% of the immigrant Muslims in Western Europe say the Sharia law is more important to us than what the Western democracies say. This is also a great point as well that they make. You know, the Western secular democracies are something we reject. We reject their laws. We need Sharia law, and this will restore the glory and the golden age of Islam to us. Whereas the Christians in Western Europe are nowhere close. You know, they much more say, about 12% say, okay, we need God's laws are more important to us, even though the Bible does say it's better to obey God than man. But Christians recognize that we live in a secular society, that we need to pray for our leaders and to obey its laws. An interesting document from the Muslim Brotherhood that came up in a court trial in 2008 called the Holy Land Terror Funding Trial. Was a document written in Arabic, and it said, just a few quotes here, enablement of Islam in North America means presenting Islam as a civilization alternative. They don't want to integrate into Western civilization. They want to establish an alternative civilization, Islamic civilization, and to support the global Islamic state wherever it is. So many of these guys are also just waiting when they say, okay, we now have a credible Islamic state, then they'll give that their full and undivided loyalty. And that will cause the various jihadi groups to really unite under this. And another part of their work is, in the sense of jihad, is to eliminate and destroy the Western civilization from within, because Western civilization is corrupt, and it'll be so much better under Sharia, and so we need to destroy it. One thing that really keeps these guys in Islam is that apostasy from Islam under Sharia law is very taken very, very seriously. And so if you have Sharia law in a Western nation somewhere, okay, you fall under this, the apostasy laws, which basically means there's no freedom of religion. You give that up, and the punishment basically for apostasy in Islam is death. And apostasy can sometimes, and this is taken from a Sharia law document that's just copied out of it, to deny any verse of the Quran or anything by which solid consensus exists. Okay, just denying one verse, you can have the charge of apostasy brought against you and you can be killed. Or if you deny that Allah intended the Prophet's message to be the religion followed by the entire world. So if you say, well, I know those Christians are good guys, or those just, they're happy with what they're thinking, I don't think we should do jihad against them. This can also be interpreted as apostasy, And if you've got a radical enough leader in a group, then he can execute this judgment against you. And that's why we see a lot of these groups doing really bad things, like what happened to these 21 Christians, Coptic Christians. I mean, the Coptic Christians, they have really grown up in Egypt under Islam, and they're really pretty tough, and they, if they were going to give up their faith, they would have done it by now. And so they weren't intimidated by this. I mean, they gave up their lives confessing Jesus Christ as Lord, and they were all beheaded. And the Bible says, and this is also something that's also, I think, such an end-time statement in Revelations 24. I saw the thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony about Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image and not received the mark. So the Bible speaks very clearly that in the end times, about the beheading of believers. And it's something that we should take note of. So to conclude, the sources of Islamic radicalism, what I've seen, is this fundamentalistic belief in the Quran as the word of God, that every single word is true and that you can't question anything about it. That the Sharia law is greater than any country's law, and the desire for Sharia law to be in place. The example set by Muhammad as a warrior of jihad, and this ideal of the establishment as the caliphate as a solution to all of their problems, and the expectation that the Mahdi will come, and the end-time prophetic statements, which are really apocalyptic in nature, talking about one war after the other until this whole one world state under Islam is established. These are things that the Jihadis focus on to recruit people and to bring them into this religion, to cause them to do terrible things. Winston Churchill, he was actually involved in the Sudan. There was, in his time in 1881 to 1899, there was called the Mahdist War, where there was also a Mahdi that arose at that time and established his caliphate. And it was quite a severe war. And he said that this religion, there are parts of this religion that cause people on 3 continents to become the worst or the best, depending on your perspective, fighting warriors because they have no fear of death, Jihad is the way, and death is my highest wish. And that's exactly the kind of warrior that you want if you want to go out and you want to establish an empire. And he experienced it then, Winston Churchill. And so I believe, as I see what's happening in the Middle East, and I see these things happening, is that there's a very strong, powerful force, a strong motivation arising. The Arab Spring didn't go the way we wanted it in terms of secular democracy, but it seems to have turned the other way. And so we have an obligation, I think, to inform ourselves. That's why we're here tonight, and so we know how to pray. And we need to know how to reach out to these people, and that's Roman will be talking a little bit next about the more normal aspects of Muslim life. All right. Thank you very much.